So I was very lucky and moved to North Wales at the same time that MBCT for depression was being published, and was introduced and got involved in some of the early training for mindfulness-based teachers in the UK. And Mark Williams was very encouraging to me, and he really opened doors for me to start working in the oncology department at the local hospital. So in the very early days, in 2000, 2001, I taught the first course for people with cancer in the hospital corridor of the oncology department. I'd been a patient there myself less than a year before, so I knew the staff quite well in a different framework, of course. And Mark was very helpful in encouraging me to explore this and to offer courses, which I did and have done ever since. So that was 2001 was the first course. And then after that, I asked John Teasdale to support me in the development of these courses, which he did over a long period of time. So he and I together were involved in actually developing and adapting MBCT for cancer, for people with cancer. So that's how it came about. I find the work really fascinating, and over the years I've become more and more engaged, not so much in cancer, but in what mindfulness offers people who are going through very high intensity anxiety, who are going through life-threatening experiences, sort of existential threats, if you like, to use a term, but it's much more than that. It's people being dropped into places that they never imagined, and then offering them something that doesn't necessarily produce any kind of miracle solution, but actually offers them some way of holding their experience in a different relationship, in a different way. And I find that immensely rewarding. And even though many of the people that I've worked with are no longer here, even some of the younger ones, you know, you work with people with cancer, and inevitably many of them die. And that's very sad. And in a way, working with people who are experiencing terminal illness is also very, very rewarding, very meaningful. I find it very, very meaningful. And I'm very keen for more and more people to get skilled in this work, because cancer is everywhere. You know, I think the statistics are huge that 1 in 4 of us, if not more, will get cancer at some point in our lifetime. So I think everybody has been affected by cancer or has had a family member affected by cancer. And it has a particular impact, and mindfulness has a particular intervention to offer, I think, that is meaningful, both for the person teaching it and for the person practicing it. Hopefully the teacher is also a practitioner. So I think it's meaningful on a number of levels. I think on a personal level, it's very meaningful to me. It really brings me into a focus of what really matters to me. Partly because I've had cancer myself, but really probably more because of the people I'm working with, and because it's so clear that for them to work out what matters to them and what has meaning for them is just a very important focus for them to use the rest of their days as well and as meaningfully as possible. But it also has meaning for me as a mindfulness-based teacher, because I think I'm sure this is true for all of us who teach, but every course I teach brings me closer to the practice and what it offers people in this situation, and what it offers me, and what it offers us in a group. And that is endlessly fascinating and significant and important, actually, yeah. So I have had breast cancer twice, and it's really quite interesting to reflect on what my practice offered me on those 2 different occasions, and in the times in between and since. So on the first occasion, my mindfulness practice was really beginning, and my practice was much more based on other ways of meditating. And I would meditate on the floor. I think the nurses and doctors thought I was pretty weird. And I would insist on sitting on the floor to have my chemotherapy. And they would screen me off because I think they thought I was so weird it might catch. But what I found was my practice didn't hold me. Maybe because of the intensity of that first cancer, maybe because the practice itself wasn't really equipped to hold people in their distress, but it didn't hold me. And then quite soon after, I was introduced to mindfulness-based approaches and started the training process that I talked about earlier with Mark Williams and his team, and John Teasdale and his team, and Zindel Siegel and his team. And yes, and I got to love mindfulness in due course, and my practice changed. And then in due course, I started teaching, and then 10 years later, I got the second cancer, which was much less traumatic because I knew the score and I knew what would be involved. But it was also very interesting because then I had a quite different practice that did hold me. And even though it's very frightening to get cancer a first time, it's extremely frightening to get it a second time. Despite that, actually, I could use my practice and my own experience a little bit like a laboratory, really, and really dive into the intensity of it, and really test out my practice and see what it was worth, see where it stood me. And it stood me well. It stood me well in the intensity. And I think I'm a much better teacher for it. So the difference between the two experiences, there were other conditions involved that I'm sure contributed to that. But I guess the difference between two different sorts of meditation and whether they can hold the experience or not is could I be with this experience and not try to run from it? Could I be with this experience and manage the times where I felt overwhelmed, or the times where I felt very frightened or very alone? And the reality was that, yes, I survived both experiences, but in the second time, I felt resourced. I felt I had some means, some quite robust means actually, to manage that experience in a way that was more kindly, was more present with it. I think I ran less often. It wasn't easy. I was very ill with the chemotherapy that I was given. So it wasn't at all easy, but I think that I was better able to look after myself. I was better able to stay with my practice, to stay with my experience, and to also notice that it changed, and that one day I could feel tremendously ill and very weak, and that I knew that in times, that this would change, that the next day I would feel different, and I could be with that. I think now I look back on that time, and I think my practice, it was a very good retreat for me, in terms of deepening my practice. But I do want to say that I don't think it's necessary to go through cancer in order to teach people with cancer skillfully. I think it's necessary to have a robust practice. I think it's necessary to be able to hold your own distress in a way that's strong enough. But I don't think it's necessary for all people teaching people with cancer to have had cancer themselves.